Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 26th of October 2011. My name is Totalbiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox@cynicalbrit.com. That's mailbox@cynicalbrit.com with topics for future shows. The game in the background is Renegade Ops, which is finally available on PC. I'll tell you this one for nothing, the helicopters in this game do not control well with a keyboard, and I would recommend switching on, quote, tank controls in order to make, in fact, anything control well with a keyboard. Let's just say that their idea of steering is a little odd. Gamepad perhaps recommended for this one. First email comes in from James. It says, I've always wanted to play a game like Horn or LoL, but the community for both games are, putting it nicely, rude, as you all know. So when I heard about Dota 2, I thought that would be a good chance to play a game like Horn or LoL, but a niggling thought entered my mind. What about the community for it? My question is, what do you think the community will be like for Dota 2? Will it be friendly for hopefully new players like me, or will both sides of Horn or LoL come in and repeat what they did in their games? They probably will come in and repeat what they did in those games, because that is, quite frankly, the way that things go. Those games inspire a special kind of rage, and it's mostly down to the mechanics of said games. We're talking about team-based games where matchmaking is prevalent, so you end up getting put into teams with, well, usually idiots, and you can lose a game entirely in such a way that it is not your own fault. Now, the possibility that it's not your own fault does not mean that it isn't your own fault, but the vast majority of vocal players will insist that it was not their fault, so they can very easily blame it on the rest of the team. You can lose, and it can be entirely outside of your control. Perhaps it wasn't, but it's very easy to use that as an excuse as well. So sometimes it genuinely is outside of your control. You play really well, and it doesn't matter because bottom lane fed and top lane fed and everything went horribly wrong. But there are other times when you probably could have done something about it, but it's extremely easy just to blame the rest of the team anyway. And you're talking about a game whereby anyone who dies gives money to the opposing team. It's pretty bad in Dota because you also lose money of your own as well, so that makes you even more angry. But when it comes down to dying in that game, you are setting your team back in multiple ways. It's not just you dying, which is inconvenient for you. You've just given money to the other team. You know how frustrating it is. Anyone that's ever played a game like that knows how frustrating it is when you've got someone that's just feeding. They're not playing well. They're feeding kills to the other team. And as a direct result, that team is much stronger than it should have been. And regardless of how well you play, there's a guy that's got 6 kills by the 8-minute mark just because of some moron, and he's pretty much unstoppable. And the thing about that game is that skill is definitely a factor, but stats are also a factor in a really major way. So there comes a point where it doesn't matter how damn skillful you are, if someone's got too much farm and too many items, you cannot statistically stop them. I mean, they would actually have to fall asleep in the middle of a fight, and even then they'll probably win with auto attacks. So that's really, really difficult to deal with. How do you fix that problem? How do you fix the community? I don't think you can. Not without taking out what makes those games the way they are. It is really, really hard to do, honestly. And I think that those games are always going to have the most hostile community possible. If you keep dying in, say, Battlefield, people tend to not get as mad at you. Yeah, they might point out every now and again that you've got pretty damn awful KD, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter. If it's a 300-ticket game and you've given away 5 of those tickets, then yeah, it kind of sucks, and you're not helping the team, but people generally don't get extremely angry at you. You give away 5 deaths in a Dota game, that can change the entire game. Change its entire face. It can make one person incredibly powerful if they happen to get all the kills off of you. It's like, oh, look, money, experience. Yeah, I'm now levels ahead of my opponents. I've now got all sorts of things. And it can turn into a massive snowball effect. Because once that starts to happen, and once you start to lose in that game, there is not an awful lot you can do to stop it. You can potentially rally round and get a really good team fight and then push the towers while your opponents are dead and get back on the field, or grab yourself a Roshan in Dota, or a Baron Nashor in League of Legends, or a Kongor in Heroes of Newerth. That can work. But most of the time when you're playing in a pub, when you're playing in the matchmaking, that isn't going to happen, because good luck trying to lead your team in order to do that. They'll just wander around like a bunch of headless chickens doing what they believe. They will not listen to your instructions, and then, of course, you will fail horribly. The best thing you can do to avoid that from happening is to find a set of friends that want to play that game with you and do not play that game outside of that group. because my god, you will get frustrated. LoL, for me, has actually got so frustrating outside of my group now that there's no way I'm going to play solo ranked anymore. It's just not going to happen. Not even duo ranked, because people are just idiots. I mean, you can have a game ruined before you even get into the game because someone's done a bad pick. It's just ridiculous how many bad players there are in that game and in Horn and in Dota, and oh, it is so frustrating. It feels really bad to be doing from the start. I actually think LoL's probably the worst in this regard because the metagame's quite strict at the minute, and you can fail horribly just because somebody didn't want to pick a support or ended up picking the wrong kind of hero. It's like, or you don't end up having a jungler, so the solo top Nasus gets mega fed and then rolls over everybody. I don't know, man. It's the most frustrating genre of games there is, and if it wasn't so damn satisfying to play, I certainly wouldn't play it. But definitely try Dota 2. I mean, it's going to have a coaching system. They are trying to make it a little bit more accessible in some ways, but when I'm playing with the beta, it's just as hardcore as the original, and will probably inspire exactly the same community. All the Dota players will probably jump over to Dota 2. A lot of the Hon players will jump over there, and you'll have the same melting pot of unpleasantness that you found in those games. So, really, if you can't stand the heat, then please keep your hand out of the fire. This email comes in from an orange Pikachu. That's disturbing. Some kind of mutation. We should put it in a zoo and do experiments on it. He, she, or it says this. Hello, TB. I would like to hear your opinion on games that have time limits throughout the whole game, specifically Dead Rising. Almost everyone I talk to about this game is very negative about the time limit, saying that time limits are just a lazy way for developers to make a game difficult. In Dead Rising 2, they made the game much, much easier, and the time limit is a lot more forgiving, probably because all of the people who complained. I personally don't like the changes. To me, it makes the time limit feel a lot less meaningful, because I can do everything without even having to care about the time limit. And all the people who were complaining about the first Dead Rising's time limit are still complaining about the one in the second game. My fear is that the devs are going to keep listening to people complaining and might take away the time limit completely. What are your thoughts on this, and do you think that the devs listen too much to the community sometimes? Well, when it comes down to Dead Rising, that game works in a very specific way. That game is weird, and that game is suitably hardcore, and I love it for that. You know, it's one of those games that doesn't really come around all that often, and Capcom has the potential to do brilliant, wonderful things with their games because they're actually crazy. And I love that. The problem is they've also been extremely anti-consumer over the past few months, and I don't like that. Dead Rising's time limits really add to the way that the game works. They give it a genuine sense of urgency. They add to the difficulty. It is not an artificial way of inflating the difficulty. It is based around the fact that that game is very time sensitive. The entire game mechanically revolves around that happening. Certain events happen at certain times. That's the way that the story goes. There is no other way for it to really work. You are in there for 3 days. That's the whole point. It's got to be time-based. It's not like it's just a series of contrived time trials. It is that for a reason. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. The world is not going to simply wait for you. It's one of those very few games where that actually happens. I'm kind of sick of seeing games like that, honestly, where the game will just wait for you and the world just stands still and revolves around you. Screw you! You arrived too late, well, this guy's dead and it's your own bloody fault. Or, oh, well, you know, you should have been in this place. You missed the meeting? Well, you are screwed. Welcome to life. I'm good with that. I like the fact that Dead Rising has that element to it. I don't think that they should listen to the community on that one at all. I mean, they listen to guys about Dead Rising, and some of the changes to Dead Rising 2, particularly off the record, actually, I don't really like. The checkpoint system, for instance, kind of ruins the point. It makes you less likely to restart the game as much as you were doing in Dead Rising and Dead Rising 2, which, as far as I'm concerned, was kind of the point, really. And I'm not such a fan of those changes. It's good because, well, Jesse is terrible at the game, and if we continue to play it, then it'll be good to have a little bit of a crutch so that he doesn't ruin everything, but I don't like that change, and I think that's something that they listen to the community on, and they shouldn't have, because Dead Rising is a very unique, hardcore property, and they shouldn't besmirch that. Listening to the community is always a really dodgy subject. We've seen it happen an awful lot with WoW, and I believe that listening to the community has actually done really bad things to World of Warcraft, because consistent vocal expressions by the community can be taken in such a way as to mean, oh god, all the subscribers believe this. We are going to lose subs if we do not make this change. And yes, there have been changes made based on that, which I feel have damaged the game almost beyond repair. So I believe developers have to be extremely careful when they take user feedback, because the majority of that user feedback is going to be awful. Most of the time they're smart enough to filter through what's good and what isn't. The main problem is that subscription-based games often have, I would say, more power in their subscriber base, because a game like that lives or dies based on subscribers continuing to be subscribed. And if a lot of people are expressing frustrations, even if they end up being a vocal minority, which they always are, let's be honest, the minority are the ones posting on the forums, then sweeping changes can be made to the game in order to cater to those people, and then bad things occur. So, yes, developers do have to be extremely careful in that regard, but I do wish people would stop ruining my hardcore franchises. Dead Rising is awesome. Quit with the dumbing down, please. This email comes in from I Am Gamer that says, just a few weeks ago, some of my friends told me about No Time to Explain. After going on about 10 minutes, I told them that I'd already bought and played it. After this, they told me they'd actually torrented the game. They're students. They went on about the developers being the ones to release the game on torrent, but with some changes, mainly being not a polished version, i.e. some bugs, and everyone was wearing pirate outfits. There was a message also saying, please buy the game. But if you can't, then tell your friends how good this game was. What do you think about indie games using the torrent community as a catalyst for word-of-mouth advertising? I think it's a great idea. I mean, indie devs have to embrace a lot of different kinds of advertising. This is very much an indie style of advertising, isn't it, really? And there are bands that release full concerts and albums on torrent sites in order to get promotion. It is, however, a calculated risk. One has to be a little bit careful. For instance, the idea of releasing a version of No Time to Explain where everyone is wearing pirate outfits, that's actually kind of cool, and I wouldn't mind playing that version. And then I think, I bought that game, how come these guys get it for free? And it's difficult not to feel a little bit down about that. Well, what you've got to consider is that those people would have taken it anyway, and if you want to help out that developer, then you kind of got to support that system as well, because the developer also understands that some people would have pirated it, so a version comes out that is specially designed for that, and so say, hey, look, here's the official pirate version, it's got some bugs in it, here, please help us out, and it can work sometimes. I think it's certainly a risk. I think that you kind of authorize piracy in that regard. It's like, well, they released the version, so, we might as well get the pirate version, am I right? It's then a bit difficult to try and convince those people to actually convert that into a sale. So I think there are a lot of risks that are being taken by the guys behind No Time to Explain in that regard. I think that it's an interesting move, certainly. I think that perhaps leaking incomplete builds of games on torrent sites is not a bad idea either. Kind of like an unofficial demo. I mean, demos do take a lot of time to put together, so if you sort of hack together a semi-broken version of the game that gets leaked onto a torrent site earlier, that can actually act as a really nice piece of marketing, because you put it out there, there's no way that people can sort of really fix it up, but they're getting a taste of the gameplay, and then when it comes out, it's like, oh, thank God, finally I can get a hold of this, and then they actually go and buy that. It wouldn't surprise me if some of these releases did that. We heard about the release of that, I think it was something like an early press build of Deus Ex Human Revolution. Was that deliberate? We don't know. There's a possibility of it, certainly, and with a major game, you might think, well, that's quite unlikely, because they like to keep a nice tight rein on their marketing, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if early releases of builds for indie games ended up coming on, or just lesser games, like stuff that's not indie but isn't particularly full price either, not a AAA title, something like an Xbox Live Arcade title, things like Renegade Ops, for instance. It wouldn't surprise me if first few levels of that ended up on a torrent site or whatever. It didn't, but it wouldn't be a terrible way to market your game in a sort of unofficial manner. You get a lot of buzz and word of mouth surrounding that. People go and investigate it because they're hearing from their friends, oh God, this new build got leaked. Isn't that exciting? It feels a little bit dangerous, a little bit exciting. It's the kind of thing that someone might want to investigate. That's a potentially good marketing strategy. Just be careful not to piss off your legitimate consumers by releasing your game in a perfect form on a torrent site and just saying, hey, come torrent our game. It's like, I just paid $60 for that. Screw you. It can annoy people, honestly. It doesn't really upset me that some people take things for free that I pay for. I really don't mind. That doesn't affect me in any real respect. But it does bother me that some people don't choose to support the product that I support and yet decide that they're entitled to get enjoyment out of it anyway. That doesn't help the games industry, and I love the games industry, and I want to see it continue to grow, especially when it comes to more unusual titles that perhaps can't absorb piracy in the same way that a AAA could, with all of the millions of dollars backing it up. Okay, folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox, and I will see you next time.